Thanks everyone for joining me for another episode of the Travel Collective, where I get to chat with really interesting, amazing people sharing their journeys, sharing their travels, and just so many other, bits of knowledge and interesting things that they're doing. So today I'm talking with Tamara. So welcome, Tamara.
Hi.
And Tamara, I really admire you. You're juggling a lot of hats between your business, having a family, and I understand you have four children.
Yes, four kids. So I have my youngest just turned 6, and then I have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and then my oldest will be turning 12 in a couple weeks.
Oh my goodness. So share little bit about your family history. Did your family growing up, when you were a kid, did they value travel and kind of instill that interest, or where did that interest kind of blossom and start, would you say?
No, we didn't travel a ton when I was a kid. I actually grew up in Alaska. And so, I mean, anywhere was technically travel at that point, right?
Yeah.
Cut off from everywhere. Um, but it wasn't really until I got older that I really wanted to, like get out and intentionally try to go explore the world and that type of thing. I've always been fascinated with history and just different cultures and having those experiences. And that was something that my husband and I discussed when we first got married. We said we really want our kids to experience different cultures. I mean, the area that we live in is not very culturally diverse. Um, and so we were like, okay, other than that fact, like we love where we
Yeah.
live. I mean, the
Right.
schools are good. I mean, the exact location that we're in is so convenient to everything around us.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, but I don't want my kids growing up having this narrow mind of what reality is for everybody. Um, and so we really wanted to incorporate travel so we can show them this is how the rest of the world is. This is, you know, not everything is what exists in our little bubble. So
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I really admire families like yourself doing that and making that a priority because we all know, just even money, a lot of us, well, a lot of my coworkers at least always think like, how can you afford to travel? But they don't, if they're not travelers themselves, they don't often realize that there's ways to do it on a budget, things like that too. So
yeah.
how old was the children or the first child, I should say, when you first introduced them to traveling then?
Um, I mean, my kids have been flying since they were all babies. So I'm trying to think what maybe the very first trip we took was, and I can't even remember because we've just always been going places. My husband and I, when we first got married, both of us had like traveling sales jobs, and
Oh,
so we
okay.
racked up a lot of points that way. Um, and so it was, I mean, we were just jumping on flights, all over the place. Doing that, and then we kind of got into that, okay, like we're just always going places, and so we just after that made it a priority to keep that part in. So I can't even think about um exactly how old they were. I think the youngest that we've taken internationally, I mean, he was less than a year old
Oh,
when
wow.
we went. So like my third child, he was yeah, he was maybe he had just turned a year old, and we went down to Cancun for like 10 days, and did that. And then my youngest, we were doing a bunch of traveling. This was like pre-COVID, but we took him to Italy and to China, and he was, let's see, he was walking, so maybe a year and a half old.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah,
So, I mean, China, and I know we recently were just chatting about Egypt. I mean, you've taken them to multiple different places then. That's amazing. So, talk
yeah.
a little bit about the planning because when you've got a family of a total of six or so, and if you ever travel with extended family, I don't know, but who gets into the planning and how far in advance are you planning some of these journeys?
I do most of the planning myself. I don't like going into things without a plan. I think the biggest marital struggle we have is what to eat for dinner each night, right?
Right.
Like what are we having for dinner? I'm like, seriously, I have to decide again. So going through all of that in advance, I will break out an itinerary. I will, do a bunch of research and find out what the best things to do are, um,
Yeah.
and then look into what family friendly, what kids would like to do, try to, figure out, okay, if people say, hey, it should take about X number of hours to go visit this, they'll be like, well, with kids, let's, like, depending on what it is, sometimes it might be, okay, let's give it an extra hour, or sometimes
Yeah.
it'll be like, oh, my kids are going to get bored with that. So we're not going to plan to spend 4 hours at this place or whatever. And so taking my kids' own personalities and their interests in mind. Um, but try to have some flexibility for that in there, while still having a plan. Like, okay, after this, we're going to do this, and after this, we're going to do this. Um, and then once I have the basic structure of all the activities that we're going to do and where we're making sure I know where we're going to stay every night if we're traveling around and having to stay at
Yeah.
like different Airbnbs or different hotels, then I figure out like traveling between the places, how long that's going to take. Are we renting a car? Are we using public transportation? Are we, needing to like walk places depending on where it is, right? And
Right.
then I'll go in and like jump on Yelp and be like, okay, let's find the best restaurants like for food in the middle of that, so that everything is literally planned from start to finish. With flexibility, like I said, but still, it's never a question of, hey, what are we going to do right now? What, like, kids are hungry. What are we going to
Yes.
feed them? Whatever it is, it's just like, hey, guys, we have this. I've already picked out the restaurant. This is what we're going to eat. And it's going to be about this time. We just have to finish this up over here and then we'll go grab food.
Yeah.
Uh, so I like to have it just that well planned. And then it makes it so much easier when we're packing and doing that type of thing. Like I already know all the activities and what days, so I can just kind of pre-plan everything. And then we can just enjoy the trip rather than
Yes.
trying to figure it all out as we go.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's excellent. And I think planning for anyone when they're traveling, it just takes away a lot of that element because otherwise we've all been there. It's like if you don't plan ahead, all of a sudden you're just starving, hungry and that's when you're right. That's when the disagreements and the fights start. It's like somebody just feed me. I need to eat.
All right.
So with all the different ages, is it challenging to choose activities that kind of appeal to all of them? I mean, they're fairly close in age, but
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is like my oldest now will want to keep going, and the youngest will be like, nope, I'm done. If you're not carrying me, I'm not taking another step.
right.
Um, And it's gotten to the point that like the oldest will even give the youngest like piggyback rides and things like that
Oh,
because he's like, I want to keep going. And then other times, it'll even be like my husband taps out and he's like, nope, I'm done too. And I'll be like, okay, cool. You can take the little one and go sit in the car. And then I'm going to take the oldest and we're still going to explore over here for a little bit longer or something like
yeah.
so, but for the most part, they're all just they've grown up this way, so they're used to it and they're good sports about all of it. So,
I love that because I think it makes all of us more flexible. And as kids too, I mean, things happen when we travel. It's like learning to just kind of roll with the punches and, you know,
yeah.
what's the plan B? How can we, how can we navigate this?
Right.
Do you have tips for choosing restaurants? Do you have have your kids ever been like picky eaters or are there dietary concerns?
We don't have any like specific dietary concerns. They're a little picky, especially traveling like super foreign places where the food is not recognizable to them. It gets a little bit trickier that way. But for the most part, um, they're willing to try most things, and then
Yeah.
a lot of snacks. Like we always make sure before we leave, like we go to Costco and we get like a whole big thing, granola bars or something to that effect. Usually, once we arrive somewhere, I'll map out where a convenience store or grocery store is so we can pick up some fresh fruit. So we always have something that they will eat. Um, but we do try to push them trying the local food and that type of thing. And most of the time, it's just based off of reviews that I see online, um, which gets a little tricky sometimes because like most of it is going off of Google or Yelp, and that's not available in all countries.
Oh yeah.
And so you will kind of lose out on some of the restaurants. But I mean, you can only like do so much, right? So it's like,
Right.
okay, well, maybe we're missing out on the number one dining experience, but we found this one over here, and that's fine. And sometimes, if especially if we're walking, and I'll be like, okay, well, the restaurant's over here, then my husband will just be like, but this one looks really good, so let's just pop in here. And I'm like, okay. So
Yeah.
there's flexibility.
That's great. Oh my gosh. So I have to ask how you choose some of these destinations. Is it because you've had points? Is it because, like China, for example? I mean, that's not, again, it's not a country a lot of Americans, US citizens would consider either going for themselves, but to take a family like you have.
So my kids actually are in a Mandarin immersion program at school.
Oh,
So they're all learning Mandarin right now. And that was the decision to put them in. That was just one of those things where I was like, hey, I can teach you pretty much anything that you're going to be learning in elementary school. So what can we do that I cannot teach you, right? Because
right.
I mean, like, as much as I love to travel, I'm not a homeschooling mom. I'm not cut out for that. But I still, want them to get something more out of school than I can give them,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um, and so that was why we made that decision. Um, and then at the time, I was working a lot with China,
Oh,
and
nice.
so I
Okay.
had an employee over there, and we actually met up with her and her family when we went over there, and like split Airbnbs together as we went across the country. So
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that is the beauty of the internet, I think, and a positive thing that actually has come out of, what we've just been through with COVID and everything is more people working remotely. You can find other families or Facebook groups with probably traveling families and make connections. So you could meet up and meet locals and spend time that way. I think that's fabulous. Oh my gosh, how amazing. So I got to ask about Egypt. I guess this was part of a bigger trip.
yes, it was probably the biggest trip overall that we've done, um, but it kind of evolved into this whole thing. And I know you had asked a question earlier about how I choose the different destinations,
Yeah.
and a lot of times we're not super picky. Like we love to travel, but it's just like, okay, well, where's somewhere we haven't been? And then we look for great deals, right?
Okay.
And um, Egypt came up because I got a notification that there were flights. So I live in the Phoenix area, um, but we have like we'll go to other metro areas if we can get a cheaper flight, right? And
Right.
usually
Oh,
there's
that's
not a lot
smart.
of deals straight out of Phoenix.
Okay.
But you can get like a super cheap flight to a different city that has deals, and it's way cheaper than trying to fly direct from Phoenix.
Yeah.
Um, so I got an alert that was telling me that there was a deal from LA to Athens. And I was like, oh, okay, well, Athens is cool. Like, we haven't been there. Love the history. That's always a place that's been on my list. And so I just like, pulled it up on Google Maps, and I'm just like looking at it. I'm like, that's really close to Egypt. I was like, I wonder because flights, once you're in like Europe, especially,
Right.
are way cheap, like going between cities in Europe. And the most expensive part is just getting there, right?
Yes.
Start
Yeah.
looking at it, and I was like, I pulled up, flights from Athens to Cairo, and it's like $100.
Oh,
And
wow.
like to fly from, say like Phoenix to Cairo directly would easily be like a $1,200
Oh, easy.
plane ticket. But to fly from LAX to Athens was only, I think the deal was like $400 a person, and
Wow.
then only $100 to go from Athens to Cairo. And so I'm like, we're still less than 50% of the cost. And even, I mean, I think we ended up spending, $100 to get to LA from Phoenix.
Right. Right.
Um, but still, like all of that together is still half the price that it would have been to
Yes.
go the entire or direct.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a little crazy, going places, but like we've learned to make an adventure out of the whole thing, right? So
Right.
we flew into LA early in the morning, And then we ended up, renting a car for just a couple of hours and went out, and there's like some different free museums
Oh,
around
yeah.
LA. And so we, did that and just kind of hung out with the kids, gave them a little bit of a break. Then, go back to the airport, jump on our plane, for like the long haul flight, get out, do a few things. Like, so we try to build in a little bit of that as we go through it. Other times, I mean, we're going like boom, 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 and the kids are dying, but we're like, you know what? It'll be worth it, I promise.
Right. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
so yeah, so that's how Egypt even, like came up to be a
Wow.
thing. Was it wasn't even like the primary destination, but we ended up making it our primary destination, because it was just, connecting these different cheaper flights together to get there.
Yeah. So how long was the trip total? How many days then were you
uh,
gone?
Total trip, I believe, was 13 days.
Oh, wow, you did fit it into 2 weeks then.
Yeah, so the school years here are like a modified year round. So
Right.
the kids, they only have 8 weeks off in the summer, but then they get 2 weeks off for a fall break, 2 weeks off for Christmas break, and then 2 weeks off for spring break. And so we were able to fit it right into their spring break, where, I mean, we were gone the entire spring break, but it's still like they didn't have to miss any school at all.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So tell me a bit more about Egypt. I mean, were they excited? I mean, so you booked all this. I love how you made use of all the different pinpoints and the flights. How far in advance did they know, like, hey, we're going to go to Egypt. We're going to, to build up the excitement and the interest and all of that.
With my oldest, we had talked about it with him pretty much from the time that we booked the flights. He's studied ancient Egypt in school, so he was the one that we knew was going to be most excited about it. Like, he even reads a lot of like novels that deal with mythology and that type.
Yeah.
He's really fascinated with all of that. And then the other kids, we mentioned it to them so that they knew, but it wasn't like they were, like they didn't exactly know what to expect or anything like that. But I think they're all old enough at this point that they're going to remember it. Because like my
Right.
young, he doesn't remember going to China. He doesn't remember going to Italy. He doesn't remember hardly even any of those trips. Like we took him like to New York and to Washington D.C. and lots of that stuff. And yeah. But at this point, like he still remembers, going to Egypt and that trip that we took. Um, so yeah, we got them involved pretty early in advance, and then started, you know, introducing a few different things where we would, study stuff or learn about it on our own, watching different movies or like National Geographic things, or, just making sure that once we got there, it made sense to them. Like they had some reference point to understand what was going on.
Right. So where did you stay in Egypt? Then you picked all the places too.
Yeah, so I did a lot of research on all of them uh, leading up to the trip, and Egypt is a little crazy. We ended up I found an Airbnb that was right next to the pyramids, which it was actually surprising. I didn't realize that the pyramids are over an hour from the airport.
Oh,
So
okay.
that surprised me when we got there. For some reason in my head, I was thinking it was a lot closer.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I ended up hiring a private driver for the entire time that we were in Egypt, just based off of some of the recommendations that I had seen online, which turned out to be a very good idea. And it wasn't crazy expensive. I mean, it sounds all bougie to say that we had like a private driver, taking us around. But I think the entire thing for taking our whole family, and this included, I mean, they picked us up from the airport, dropped us off at our hotel, picked us up in the morning, took us to the pyramids, took us to, I mean, like all the different sites around Giza. And then the next day, we actually went down to Luxor, and they had another person pick us up in
Wow.
Luxor. And I mean, like it included literally everything, an admission to the pyramids, admission to the Valley of the Kings, admission to all that stuff. And the whole price was like $1,100
Oh, wow.
so,
Yeah.
for 6 people, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, and 100% worth it. I would never in a million years try driving in Egypt. Uh, it was the most terrifying experience of my entire life. Just being there and looking out the window and seeing traffic in general.
Yes. Yeah.
It's crazy. There's so many people there. Um, but like it's almost like there's no laws for driving. So they have most of the time they have lanes, they have white
Right.
lines,
Yeah.
but those are just a suggestion. Or some people take it maybe like a personal challenge where it's just like, okay, you have 6 lanes for cars. We're going to try to fit 8 cars across instead of 6.
Right.
And if
Right.
are weaving in and out and around and everybody's honking, our driver even explained it's like an entire other language is just them honking their horns and communicating with one another as they're going through it. And you're never more than maybe like 6 inches away from the car next to you, just zipping around, still going like freeway speeds, right?
Oh no. Yeah.
And then you're like going and you see, like, okay, you've got all of these, cars going, and then you've got a guy on a moped, on the freeway, and then you have somebody, like riding a camel, and then you have like a mom pushing a stroller with a baby on the freeway, and then you have a bunch of guys that just decided to park their cars on the freeway and sit in the median and have lunch together.
Oh my.
Like, it's literally the most chaos you could possibly imagine. But the thing is, like, the entire time we were there, we never saw a single accident.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Ever, like, and we even asked, we're just like, okay, these people are literally walking across the freeway in open traffic. Like,
Right.
how are they not getting hurt? Like, how often do people like kill somebody else?
Yes.
The way that they were explaining it, it was really interesting because they said, well, it's this very different mentality. Here in the United States, everybody's very focused on what they need to do,
Yep.
right? Like, okay, well, I need to get from point A to point B, right? And over there, they have that same thing, but they also have this sense of responsibility where it's like, okay, well, I have a responsibility to get from point A to point B, but I also understand that you have a responsibility to get from point A to point B, which intersects with, like my path to
Yeah.
point A to point B. And so I also have a responsibility not to hit you. Whereas here, it's all about, okay, well, I had right away. No, I had right away, like all this stuff. And there, it's
Yes.
just like, well, I just didn't want to hit you.
Right.
So stopped, right? Like, um, and so it was really interesting, like seeing how they they go about that. Because it's just like it looks like complete chaos, but it works for them,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so very, very fascinating. But being able to see that, from passenger seat rather than a driver's seat was definitely a um, but yeah, it's just it's absolutely insane there, and it just all of that chaos. But it was wonderful to be able to experience it.
So especially too because you didn't know any of the language, having a driver and a guide I think would be super helpful.
Yes. So for this trip, I did try to learn some basic phrases. So, I mean, we were going to 4 different countries on this trip, and I was trying to get at least a basic understanding of each of the different languages so that, if I had to communicate, I could, say something. Um,
Right.
but Arabic was very difficult for me. I did not get very far figuring that one out. Um, but almost everything was in English,
Oh,
and almost
really?
everybody spoke English. So it was, I mean, Egypt used to be a British colony
Right.
until, I mean, not that long ago. So most people there do speak at least somewhat. And if you stay in the more touristy areas, I mean, even like freeway signs and things are in English. Like they'll have
Oh,
Arabic
okay.
and English on all the street signs. It's only when you get into like the really, really local areas that you don't see any English anymore.
Yeah. So what were some of your favorite sites when you went to Egypt? Which ones?
So I thought I was going to enjoy the pyramids more than I did. They they were amazing, but overall it was crowded. They were really, really hot inside. I mean, like dripping sweat,
Oh, yeah.
and kind of anticlimactic. Like, I can be like, cool, I went into the pyramid. Great.
Right.
Which I've been dreaming of that since I was a little kid, right?
Yeah.
But then afterward, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I went in the pyramids. On the other hand, it was kind of a last minute decision to tack on the trip down to Luxor, which we had to jump on a flight. And it was, I mean, a single day thing. Like we had to leave at like 4 o'clock in the morning to get on a flight. And then we didn't come back home until 11 o'clock that night,
Oh, wow.
which doing that with kids was pushing it a bit.
Yeah.
But Luxor was so much better. Like I absolutely loved it. So going into the Valley of the Kings, where you can walk into the tombs, like we went into King Tut's tomb and we went into a few of the other ones. But I mean, it's so incredible. Like the paintings that are still on the walls and all the colors, the intricate carvings. I mean, everything is just absolutely stunning still. And so to see that level of preservation
Yeah.
after all this time was that was what was like most inspiring. And then down there, like they have different temples that you can walk through. And that's where you really get a feel for the size of everything. Like the pyramids, they're so big that when you get up close to them, like you can't even appreciate necessarily how big they are because you're just like, okay, well, all I can see is like a big rock.
Right,
And
right.
like you're
Yeah.
looking up, but the perspective kind of like changes a bit, right? Because you're so
Right.
close to it. But then going to these temples and seeing these giant columns, and again the intricate carvings that are still on them, and all of that. I mean, it's absolutely surreal.
That's amazing. So did you guys interact with some locals? Do you have some experiences of some interactions with locals and kind of some takeaways from that?
Yeah, a few different things. So one thing I noticed is people there, and I was actually really worried about this because again I had read a lot of different blogs where they talk about how Westerners are not appreciated, like they don't like like the style of dress, and making sure you're very modest, and all of that. um and I was worried that we would stand out too much. I mean, I know there's a lot of touristy people and that type of thing, um but I still didn't like I try to fit in to the
Right.
culture,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I was slightly worried about that, but it actually was kind of the opposite. I mean, we were really surprised. Almost everywhere we went, if like there were a bunch of kids that were always on like school tours and stuff like that too, and they constantly were coming up to us and wanting to take selfies with us. And I mean, they wouldn't speak a word of English. They just come up and be a selfie, selfie,
Oh
selfie,
my
and
gosh.
wanting to take pictures with my kids, wanting to take pictures with me, and they were just like super embracing of
Oh, wow.
tourists and people that were different from them, not like pointing and
Right. Yeah.
staring and that type of thing. It was just like, oh my gosh, there's foreigners. We want to hug you. We want to see like all of that. The biggest experience I think for us. So when we first got there, we had been flying. I mean, for days at this point,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And when we arrived in Egypt, it was fairly late in the evening. And like I said, I since we had a private driver, I hadn't like mapped out like distances and driving times and all that stuff. I was like, oh, this one, I don't even have to worry about it, right?
Right. Yeah.
That was when I didn't realize that it was over an hour from the airport to get to our Airbnb. And so, not taking that into consideration, I was like, okay, my kids were all starving at this point,
Yeah.
and I mean, we had been going for a long time. Um, and at that point, like, we asked the driver, we're just like, okay, we have to eat. Like, where do you recommend? We don't even know like what type of food to get here or
Yes.
anything like that.
Yeah.
And he recommended a place that was like just a block or so away from our Airbnb. And so we started taking our stuff in there, and it's like a kind of like a hotel-ish thing, but the owner of it came out and he had a couple guys come out and like they took all of our bags and brought them up to our room and everything for us. And then he was showing us their rooftop patio. And so we
Oh,
walked up
nice.
there and it was just absolutely incredible. I mean, the pyramids were all lit up and we were just like right there. And it was like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
actually here, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but then the kids got over that a lot faster than I did. And they're just like, yeah, food, mom, we need food. And so we're sitting there and we were still talking to the owner of the place. He was explaining how that building, like he was born there. He's grown up there his entire life and how much he loves sharing with, you know, all the tourists that come in and sharing his life experience with them and that type of thing. And the kids are, I mean, literally like pulling and tugging at us as we're listening to this. And we're like, yeah, we know, we know. And he's like, oh, you guys haven't eaten yet? And we're like, no, but they told us there's a place super close by. So we were just going to walk over there. He's like, no. I have a better place. Let's all go get in my car and we're going to drive over there. And
Wow.
so he has all six of us into his car and he just starts driving. And we were driving for a good like 20 minutes. And at this point, I'm like, okay, where is he taking us? Like,
Yeah, right.
we just get into a car with a stranger. And I mean, like
Yeah,
all these.
right, exactly.
But then he goes in, and we are not in a touristy area anymore. Like there is no English anywhere. I mean, like the level of chaos that we had seen on the freeway was, I mean, amplified like crazy now because now we're on like these, you know, like side streets and things like
Yeah.
that. And it's like 10 o'clock at night, but there's so many people out and it's still so noisy and chaotic and it's just crazy. But he takes us to this restaurant. I'm trying to think. I think it's called a koshari, if I'm remembering correctly. But we go in there, and again, like going in, I was like, we are the only foreigners here. Like this is
Right.
these are all locals. And I was like, okay, are we going to be accepted? And we've got a bunch of kids, right? And we
Yeah.
different countries before where people will look at our kids and the fact that we have four kids and it's like a huge turn off. And so, and I knew Egyptian culture, like Arabic culture, they're more used to larger families and things like
Right.
that. But still, I'm like, okay, like, are they going to be mad that, you know, we're like
Yes.
Americans here? Are they going to be mad that we have a bunch of kids, you know, like still
Yes.
kind of things out? We go and sit down, and of course, I have no idea what the food is or what we're ordering or anything like that. But the guy that we're with, he just orders everything. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to trust you
Yeah.
because I have no idea what this is. But I'm hungry and my kids are hungry, so we're going to go with it. And we're sitting there, and I mean, you can tell people are staring, people are looking at us, and I'm like feeling very exposed. And then this guy comes out of the back kitchen. And I mean, he looked like he'd had a little bit of a rough life. He's got, you know, like missing teeth and, you
Right.
know, like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is it. They're going to kick us out or
Yeah,
whatever. And,
exactly.
but the other people, you could see they're interacting with him, knowing like, okay, I was like, he's like the owner of this place. Like the
Yeah.
are talking to him and whatnot, or avoiding him kind of in a way, right? And he makes a beeline for our table. And I was like, okay, this is it. Like, we're
Yeah.
going to get in trouble for just being American
Right, for
or
just
something.
being here, right?
But he comes over, and all of a sudden, he has the biggest smile on his face. And it was like, you know, he never really had tourists in
Oh,
his restaurant before.
oh,
So
wow.
then he's sitting there and he's like thinking it's this huge honor to have tourists. And he like kisses all my kids on their heads and is just like, you know, shaking our hands and you know, doing all this. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is like amazing, right?
Right.
So then he brings out all this food and then brings us extra food just for fun, right?
Right, yeah.
How to put everything together. So the dish, it's kind of like a marinara sauce, but it has a mixture of different pastas in it. Like there's like a macaroni type pasta, but then there's these little like ball pasta things. Like it's all different types of pasta, and this like marinara thing on it, and then everything there is based on eggplant. So then there's these like chunks of eggplant in it, and then kind of like a spicy sauce that you can pour on it, but then you
Right.
put vinegar on it, and then this other spicy thing. Like you have to layer all these things on it. Um, and it was incredible. Like I don't even know all the different things that were in
Right.
it, but
Yeah,
it was so good. And, him just like showing us how to do it and everything. And I mean, my kids just like devoured it. They thought it was great.
that's amazing.
Um, so yeah, it's experiences like that, where they really get a taste of real life in other countries, not
Right.
just like, you know, when you visit somewhere and you just kind of dip your toe in, but you don't
Yeah,
really feel it, right?
right.
So yeah.
Oh, and it just sounds so amazing that you were open enough to trust the guy, like, "Come on, get in my car, you're hungry, let me take you somewhere." I mean, it sounds incredible. Yeah. So what were some of your takeaways from Egypt? What would you recommend to people considering taking their family? Do you have tips on how to
Yeah.
prepare or pack or any of that?
So if we were to do it again, and I mean Egypt, like I said, this was part of a bigger trip, right? And so we were only there for a couple days, and I would probably spend longer there if I could. And I would definitely do it differently. So the main thing is, like I said before, flying directly to Egypt is very expensive. But if you can get somewhere in Europe nearby for cheaper, there's usually flights to Egypt, and you can save a ton of money that way. So that's my first tip. The other thing is, if we were to do it again, we probably would do one of the Nile River cruises,
Oh,
and
nice.
and you get to see more. And the southern part of the country, you get to experience the culture more than just the chaos, right?
Okay,
And so
right.
it you really feel more like a part of it, and less people go to some of the more southern cities. So I would say to do something like that, and then taking your time to just flow up the Nile, stopping in the different cities on the way. Um, then you can see more, but then also really get a feel for everything. Um, the packing wise, it's hot there. I mean, that's just like what it is, right?
Right, yeah.
I ended up wearing mostly like sundresses and that type of thing, still keeping it modest, making sure I had sleeves, making sure it was, like went below my knees.
Right.
Um, we didn't go into any mosques or anything while we were there, so I never had to cover my head, but I brought a shawl just
Okay.
um, because they won't let women visit in a mosque without covering her head.
Okay.
My daughter as well. Um, we didn't end up using them, but I wanted to keep them just in case. But for the most part, yeah, it's hot, and there's not a lot of shade in most of the places that you go. So when we went around the pyramids, like we did a full camel ride going
Right,
around
right.
the opposite side, and I mean you're in direct sun the entire time. Um, Going like so, the Valley of the Kings is farther south, and so it's even hotter there. And again, you're out in the desert. You are exposed to the sun like almost the entire time, to the point that I mean, like even my kids, and we're from Arizona, like we're used to the heat,
Right,
right?
yeah.
And it was tough. And I mean, there's no air conditioning inside any of the ruins, obviously. Like they'll
Oh,
usually
yeah,
have a
right.
clean that has something, right? But it's very hot and humid in like inside the pyramids, inside the tombs, things like that. So just being prepared for that, making sure you have water, making sure, oh, and you can't drink any of the water there.
Oh, okay. That's good to
And
point
they'll
out.
even tell you, like, when we go places, like any restaurant that we went to, they'd be like, "You're a foreigner, don't drink the water. Here's a
Oh,
bottled water.
oh,
Don't."
okay. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and like at our Airbnb, like they gave us bottled water. We made sure to stop somewhere and pick up bottled water. And then we also got water bottles that had filters
Oh,
in
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So if we
Right.
absolutely had to, we could, like put straight tap water in there, and it would still be safe to drink. Um, but other than that, I mean, just make sure you're prepared for all of that. Be prepared for a lot of walking, so make sure you're in comfortable shoes. And it's very dusty, so you probably don't want like sandals, because
Oh,
your feet
yeah.
will be like completely gross by the end of the day. Um, but other than that, I mean, like based on what I was reading about before going and what I actually experienced, it was a lot more laid back.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
in terms of, like what you can wear and what you can, like all of that, I was really concerned about it, but it didn't seem to be really a problem. So
Yeah. And I know you had some things you wanted to share too about some takeaways from Egypt, just, observations, things that it taught you. Do you want to elaborate on some of those?
I think, I mean, overall, the biggest thing is experiencing different cultures, right? And we get into this feeling in America that everything has to be like a certain way, right?
Right.
We have rules that we need to follow and processes and all of that. And going over there, it was like literally they took all of that and balled it up and threw it out the window. And I mean, by out the window, I mean the half finished building window that was never fully constructed and had like, I mean, it's crazy there, like I said. But I we're supposed to be like happier here, right? Like first
Right.
world
Yes.
country, we're supposed to be
Yeah.
like more blessed and more, like we have everything, right?
Yeah.
And over there, like they didn't compartmentalize their lives, right? It wasn't like, okay, this is work and this is family time and this, and everything had its own bucket and separated and processes and, like ways to do it. It was just like, it was all one entire existence,
Wow.
right? And I was like, this is more the way it should be,
Right.
right? Not like,
Right. Yeah.
I'm coming home from work, I'm hanging up my work hat and putting on my home hat, I mean,
Yeah.
like it all one and the same. And, so we were noticing like people, like when the guy was taking us around, he took us to dinner and like that type of thing. He also stopped by a couple shops and was showing us things. And it's 10:30 at night. I mean, basically almost 11 at this point. And the shop owner would like come out and still talk to us and offer us drinks. They had this hibiscus tea and or they had lots of sodas. Like they'd always offer us sodas because the kids and everything. But they always just were so grateful for whatever it was. It wasn't like
Right.
inconveniencing me right now. I can't believe that I have to come out and help you and that type of thing. It was always just so warm and welcoming. And so the biggest takeaway I think for me was just taking a step back and realizing that just because something is done this way, just because you're used to life being in a certain way and you think this is the way it's supposed to be, that doesn't mean that's legitimately how it's supposed to be.
Right.
Look around you and figure out a new way to do it, or you know like experience a different culture and how they view the world, and then adopt those things into your own life, like make it a part of you. So,
Right.
you become more through these experiences.
Yeah. I think that's super beautiful. So where are you thinking of taking your family next?
Oh gosh, I don't know. And my husband was like, we're not traveling again for a bit. But I don't know. I have lots of places that I want to go. I really want to go to South America. We haven't gone there yet. My oldest, his name is Rio, and so he really wants to go to Rio de Janeiro. And that we actually had a trip planned to Brazil for spring break of 2020, and obviously that got canceled. So those are some of the places we'd like to go. We'll just have to see. We're a little bit more spontaneous with things, so
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's great. So tell people tomorrow where they can reach out to you and find you. I know you have a website with a lot of stuff for business owners of different kinds. So tell us a little bit about that and where people can reach out.
so the best way to reach me is probably on Instagram, and my name on there is just Tamauro, so Tamauro. And from there's links to my website and every other thing for reaching out. So that's probably the best way.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.